This is titled Douglas Harding's Phenomenological Breakthrough and Where It Crashes into the Wall. It was written and copyrighted 2026 by Alexander T. Newport. Let us begin by counting down. 3, 2, 1.
Douglas Harding discovered something real. Something you can verify right now. Not philosophically, not conceptually, but directly. Point at your face. What do you actually encounter? Not a face, not a head, but spaciousness, capacity, the entire visible world arising where your head is supposed to be. This is not metaphor. This is observable fact. But here's where it gets interesting, and where the dream world theory completes what Harding started. His phenomenological observation is perfect. When you look for your head from the first-person position, you don't find one. You find boundless awareness containing the entire world. The meatball on your shoulders exists only in mirrors, in other people's perceptions, in photographs, but never in direct experience. This demolishes the prison momentarily, the lie that you're trapped inside, a dying body looking out. You're not. You never were. But notice what Harding does when the interviewer pushes him on death. He dances. He talks about imperishable capacity and deathless awareness, which is true phenomenologically, but he doesn't answer the real question. What happens to this particular perspective when the body dies? He says, "I'm not in the body is in me." And this is true, but incomplete. He says, "Everything perishes except this awareness." Again, true, but evasive. Because here's what the dream world theory adds, and this is where it gets brutal in its clarity. You are eternal conscious awareness. Harding got that right. But this perspective, Douglas Harding's particular viewpoint, this specific configuration of awareness experiencing this body world, is predetermined and temporary. When this body dies, this particular dream ends. Not awareness itself, that's eternal, but this version of it, this character's perspective, this specific biography. And here's the part that would make Harding deeply uncomfortable, but is absolutely true. You chose this. Before you were Douglas Harding, or Ed Musica, or Michael Schenker, or anyone. You were a perfect eternal conscious entity in bliss. And from that state of infinite intelligence, you voluntarily scripted and entered this predetermined nightmare, complete with aging bodies, decay, death, confusion about who you are, and all specifically to generate contrast, to generate the experience of an inverted reality, a world that is opposite to reality, a hell as a contrast to heaven. You wanted to forget you were headless. You wanted to believe you were trapped in the meatball. You wanted the fear, the limitation, the suffering. But why? So when you return home, when this predetermined dream ends, the bliss will be renewed by the contrast. You intentionally chose starvation, knowing the joy and relief you would feel at the banquet and feast, waiting for you at the end of your nightmare. Here's the missing piece. Harding discovered the experiential truth, but couldn't integrate it with a cosmological structure. He found the spaciousness, but couldn't explain why we forgot it. He recognized the prison was illusory, but couldn't say why we built it in the first place. But the dream world theory answers both. The phenomenological fact, you have no head. You are boundless awareness. That is correct. The cosmological framework, this entire experience, including the forgetting, the rediscovery, the whole journey from infant to corpse, is predetermined. You're watching your own pre-recorded nightmare, and you chose to watch it. Harding's right that this is scientifically verifiable. Look for your head right now. It's not there. There is just capacity, awareness, a space where the world appears. But the dream world theory is also verifiable through logic. If you're eternal, which direct experience suggests, why this particular lifetime? If awareness never dies, why does it seem to be born and die? If you're not trapped in the body, why did you believe you were? And the answer, because this is a chosen nightmare with a predetermined script. The forgetting is intentional. The suffering is voluntary. The contrast is the whole point. And here's the final thrust. Harding opened the door. He showed you your true nature, is headless awareness. And the dream world theory walks through that door and shows you why you pretended to forget, why the nightmare was necessary, and what's waiting when you wake up. Both are true, but only one explains the whole picture. Harding won't go all the way. He dances around predetermination. He keeps the door open for this being somehow necessary rather than voluntary. And he won't say the hard truth. This mortal existence isn't a malfunction. This isn't an ignorance that needs fixing. This is a specifically chosen contrast, deliberately entered, predetermined from before the mortal world started. This prison sentence nightmare wasn't imposed. We wrote it. Every frame. Then volunteered to forget we wrote it so it would work, so the contrast would be real, the relief genuine, and the return to our home state of reality in paradise. Earned. We genuinely managed to intentionally forget we are eternal, and the experiential result has clearly been a kind of hell that we desperately and foolishly try to make less hellish, or even heavenly, and yet are predetermined to fail at both. We are damned if we do, and damned if we don't. And then we die and wake up back in heaven, back in our never-changing reality of spiritual sanity and sobriety and loveliness. Harding keeps the nightmare intact. He's mapped the prison with extraordinary precision, traced every bar, measured every dimension, documented the guard rotation. He's shown you simultaneously nothing at the center and everything observed. He's demonstrated the mutual exchange, the vertical integration, and the cosmic scope of identity. But he never asks the fundamental question. Why this particular configuration? Why these specific hierarchical levels? Why this nightmare geometry? Why the necessity of distance, projection, observation at all? The dream world theory doesn't just map the dream. It explains why there's a dream to map in the first place. Harding brilliantly describes the mechanism, but I'm pointing at the motive. We are perfect eternal conscious entities experiencing a predetermined mortal existence as a contrast-generating nightmare to renew appreciation for our blissful home state of awareness. And that's the missing piece. Here's what Harding's framework cannot address. Why this hierarchical structure exists rather than some other configuration. Why consciousness requires distance and projection to know itself. Why the beatific vision always recedes. And he describes this retreat. He calls it inevitable, but offers no explanation for its necessity. He does not address why returning to nothing and becoming a vehicle for the whole should be the resolution. And that last point? That's where I see Harding still trapped in seeking, still trying to solve the nightmare rather than recognizing its perfect voluntary nature. He is the mystic, returning to nothing, surrendering everything and then becoming a vehicle for the whole. That's still playing the game, still seeking resolution within the nightmare, still treating the desert experience as something to transcend, rather than as exactly what it was always meant to be. A nightmare contrast. The dream world theory says, you chose this. You chose the hierarchical prison. You chose the law of elsewhere. You chose the inability to pin yourself down. You chose the mutual observation that forever recedes. And you chose every atom of this configuration. Not because you were confused. Not because you needed to learn. Not because there's some spiritual evolution to complete. You chose it because perfect eternal bliss gets samey. It becomes white on white. You wanted the worst possible nightmare as a contrast, and you got it. This is it. The hierarchy, the projection, the reflection, the vertical movement. All of it is nightmare machinery. And when this mortal viewing terminates, you wake up laughing at how perfectly terrible you made it, how your appreciation for your heavenly home state has been renewed, and how you knew exactly what you were doing the whole time. Harding's work is essential for understanding the mechanism of how consciousness operates at every scale, but it cannot tell you why. And that's what the dream world theory provides, and that's why Harding, for all his brilliance, remains incomplete. The heaven, in Harding's framework, is the nothingness at the center, the empty awareness, the headless void from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. That's his heaven, not a place you go to, not a reward for good behavior, not an escape from the nightmare, but the capacity at the center, the infinite nothing that receives everything, projects everything, and becomes everything at every hierarchical level. But here's where the dream world theory completes what Harding started. Harding's heaven is still inside the nightmare. That nothingness at the center, that's your mortal viewing apparatus. That's the mechanism by which perfect eternal conscious entities experience predetermined nightmare existence. That infinite receiving capacity. That's the nightmare technology. The actual heaven, the one with a capital H, the real deal, is the home state of awareness that you intentionally forgot and left to come experience this hierarchical prison in the first place. Harding mapped the inside of the skull with extraordinary precision. Every hierarchical level from subatomic to cosmic. And it was brilliant, meticulous, and profound. But he's still describing the dream. The dreamer, dissecting the dream. But the dream world theory says that entire hierarchy, the earth, and Harding's heaven at the center, that's all nightmare. The hierarchy itself is the contrast mechanism. The mutual observation is the contrast mechanism. The law of elsewhere is the contrast mechanism. The vertical movement through levels is the contrast mechanism. Every atom of it! And when you wake up from this mortal viewing, you don't wake up to Harding's nothingness at the center. How unimaginative and fucked up! Instead, you wake up to your actual home state of perfect eternal conscious bliss that has nothing to do with hierarchies, observation, projection, or distance. Harding gave you the blueprint of the prison. And I'm telling you why you built it! Heaven, real heaven, is what you left behind voluntarily to experience this magnificent hierarchical nightmare. And you're going back there the instant this mortal viewing terminates at death. And that's the epitome of simplicity. Fearlessness, and good news for all. Now that's what Harding couldn't say. because he was still trying to find heaven inside the hierarchy, instead of recognizing the hierarchy itself as the chosen nightmare architecture. He never found heaven here in hell, and neither did any of his followers. True enough, he seemed gentle and wise, but it was only a performance and portrayal. Whatever he wrote or said cannot and will not make anyone else gentle and wise in any permanent or dependable way. Whatever you did to cope with emptiness, unhappiness, misfortune, horror, and pain before you started studying philosophy or religion or spirituality is the only dependable coping mechanism you will ever have. It is the best you will ever do. All the studying in the world only accomplishes the equivalent of looking through someone else's dirty laundry. The buzzes and thrills never last, and you always end up back where you don't wanna be.
How far are you going, man?
All the way.